So, Mark, a very good afternoon,
Good afternoon,
to you.
Dan.
Let's start, if we can, on Ukraine. What's your sense here of what President Trump is trying to achieve in regards to this meeting with Vladimir Putin next week? I mean, he wants to bring the war to an end. Do you think he's expecting to be able to do that next week?
Well, I think he would like to actually be able to announce a deal next Friday and say, look, I've agreed how to end this war, and then present that to President Zelenskyy. I think myself that's unlikely to happen. The Russians are certainly saying it's a complicated process and it's a challenging one, and it'll take some time. And I'm sure that is absolutely correct, because the worst thing for Ukraine certainly would be some down and dirty deal between Trump and Putin that is then presented to Zelenskyy as a fait accompli.
Isn't what President Putin is trying to do here is, yes, get a form of legitimacy with the meeting in Alaska, but do what he's, let's be honest about this, done quite successfully so far this year since President Trump got into the office, and it's just to buy himself more time to drag this process out?
Absolutely. I mean, the Russians have strung Steve Witkoff and Donald Trump along for 7 months very successfully while they prosecute the war on the battlefield. And I'm sure the Russians see this meeting as, in a sense, a reward for them, because they'll want to talk not just about Ukraine, but also about the bilateral relations, economic potential, the frozen north, etc. And will present this as a sort of end of Putin's isolation in the West. So for them, the meeting is already a success. They will want to string it along. They'll probably maintain their maximalist demands as long as they can. And it'll be interesting to see how President Trump responds to that.
And so, Mark, what's interesting today also is we've had that phone call between President Zelenskyy and Sir Keir Starmer in the last couple of hours. And it's pretty clear, not just that effectively Ukraine doesn't want to be cut out of any deal, but that Europe wants to be part of this process too and is trying to make itself relevant.
Absolutely. And there's going to be a meeting, I think, of national security advisors, and they will be working up a message and together with the Americans to make sure that this meeting on Friday isn't what we all fear, which is isolating Zelenskyy and then blaming Zelenskyy for not accepting an unacceptable deal that's struck between Putin and Trump. Because although Trump is already talking about land swaps, well, that's a real problem for Zelenskyy, because it's unconstitutional to give away land in the first place. And also, of course, Ukraine does not occupy any Russian land at the moment. So really, the land swaps are rewarding Putin for his aggression. And also, there's the bigger question in some ways in the longer term is, how is any ceasefire that's announced going to be sustainable without proper security guarantees for Ukraine going forward? And those proper security guarantees have got to include NATO and the United States. And so far, the Americans haven't shown any willingness to offer those guarantees to Zelenskyy.
But just on trying to remain relevant, and these talks are going to be hosted by JD Vance and indeed by David Lammy. But at the end of the day, does that really matter when we know ultimately it'll be down to what Donald Trump wants to do in any given moment?
Well, of course, that is true, Darren, but we do have influence with the Americans. And when we're talking together with the Europeans as well, that has some impact. As you've seen, Keir Starmer's getting on pretty well with Donald Trump, and you've had the JD Vance, the David Lammy sort of bromance going on as well. So, we are close allies of America, and they do respect our views. So I don't want to suggest we don't have any influence. The difficulty is that we know that President Trump is inclined to sort of listen to the last person he spoke to. And if he's isolated with President Putin in Alaska, there is a risk that President Putin will roll him over.
Yeah, maybe he needs to bring Melania along as well. We're told that she's pretty influential these days. So, Mark, can we just turn also to, obviously, the other big story this week, and that is Gaza and Israel. And interestingly, a real divergence, I would now suggest, between Germany, France, the UK, and its ally Israel.
Yes, I think the Western allies, including Germany, who, let's bear in mind, Germany didn't go along with Britain, France, and Canada in saying that they wanted to recognize a Palestinian state. They have always been very stalwart supporters of Israel. They're the second largest defense suppliers to Israel, for obvious historical reasons. And so for them to join in this condemnation or criticism of what is been announced by the Security Cabinet, I think is very significant. It just emphasizes the fact what a big military and political gamble this is on the part of Netanyahu.
And that's the question, I suppose. Is it a gamble, though? Because isn't the calculation, clearly he wants to remain in power. I mean, I think his political opponents in Israel would certainly accuse him of that, but some of his political allies would as well. But ultimately, again, it comes back to Donald Trump. And as long as America's provided and willing to provide that support, does it really matter to Mr. Netanyahu what the UK, Germany, France and others think?
Well, at the end of the day, probably not, but it is a massive political gamble on his part because, already nearly 1,000 IDF soldiers have died in this campaign, and a lot more will probably die if they try this sort of urban warfare in Gaza City to eradicate the remains of the Hamas fighters, not to mention the chances that a lot of the hostages that are still alive, the 20 or so, will probably not survive. We shouldn't forget that of the 150 hostages so far released, only 8 were released through military action. All the others were released as a result of a ceasefire and a swap. And that's what the families of the hostages are most worried about. So there's a big military gamble there, but there's a huge political gamble because a majority of Israeli public opinion believes that the best way forward is a ceasefire deal, not intensified military action. So I think there's a lot at stake for Netanyahu, not just the condemnation by traditional allies around the world.
Just very finally on that, Mark. I mean, we seem further away from a deal than ever before. The Israelis are saying, and the Americans have accused Hamas of simply not wanting one. Where is the pathway now, do you think, for a political deal? Many have suggested, by the way, of course, that the announcements of this incursion into, or this occupation of Gaza is actually essentially a tactic by the Israelis to try and force Hamas back around the table again.
Yes, it might be that. And the fact that it's quite a long drawn out process, they're talking about evacuation up to the symbolic date of October the 7th before any military action starts, does suggest that they're giving Hamas a last opportunity to come to the table. Indeed, that's what some of the right wing members of Netanyahu's cabinet are concerned about, like Smotrich and his party. So that might be a tactic and it might be successful, but I have to say I find it difficult to see how this will end well in either way, because Hamas are not going to agree to give up the hostages when they know that as soon as they do, the Israeli full military might will be imposed upon them. And so a further chance of having a peaceful resolution seems to me to be very remote indeed. And all the time, the sort of prospect of a two-state solution disappears over the horizon. So I can't say that I'm optimistic about a sustainable peace in the Middle East region.
OK, so Mark, we really appreciate your time and analysis here on Sky News this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren.